Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Darryl Cooper, the producer and host of the Martyrmade podcast that features incredibly in-depth explorations of various contentious issues such as the Israel-Palestine conflict, a whole bunch of stuff. Really enjoy his content. About a month ago, Darryl went on an independent content creators platform known as Tucker Carlson, and in that discussion, he spoke about World War II from a dissident point of view, which sparked a bunch of online rowdiness and debate. And I somehow got swept up in that a little bit in the periphery, trying to figure out why people were reacting so strongly to Darryl's work. When I viewed his work, I found somebody who seemed to be trying to humanize everybody in any given subject that he tackles. And Darryl was very kind enough to lend me my ear, I guess, is what happens, because it is an interview. And in this conversation, we talk a lot about how he got to where he is and why he so stridently attempts to see conflict from all the different people's perspectives and not just have a closed-end story, but an open-ended story. I highly suggest you check out his work. It's linked in the description. If you enjoy this content, consider liking, subscribing, and donating via the links below. Without further ado, here is Darryl Cooper.
I get anxious during interviews, so I move around a lot.
Yeah. Well, try to take it calm with you. I've been devouring your content. I got probably like 30 or 40, 20 to 30 hours. So I have all these different kind of pieces of what you're working on. I'm almost done with the 4th episode of Fear and Loathing, New Jerusalem. Listen to a lot of your interviews too. It's funny because I was listening to that this morning. You published that in 2016, I think. And you talk a lot about the immigration issue. And that's kind of ramped up a whole lot, at least for our country, and the discussion around that. So it's kind of like funny where you're doing like this foreshadowing a lot.
Yeah.
Does that creep you out when you do that? When you're just talking about something and then it becomes like super important later on down the road?
No, I don't think so, because, there are a few things that are just always going to be recurringly important, and, immigration is one that, especially, we can talk about this like as we go on if you want, but probably one of the most interesting things about the United States, something that makes us so different from Europe or Israel or Palestine, say, is that we've had to just constantly renegotiate our identity again and again and again from the very beginning, right? Just wave after wave of new people that if we didn't bring them in, the continent was going to be settled by other people, another country, not us. And so it's the only way you were going to do it. And so wave after wave of people from really like extremely foreign parts of Europe and now the rest of the world coming in, and each wave having to elbow its way in. There's conflict each time, when the Irish came in, and then a generation later with the Jews and Italians, Eastern, Southern Europeans, there was more conflict. And then the great migration of African Americans out of the South into the cities of the North and West, there's conflict again. And then, of course, now we're sort of at this, at this inflection point where immigration seems to be, at least for a significant chunk of the country, like the number one issue that people are concerned with. It was the thing that launched Trump's campaign really in 2016, was the immigration issue. And so, this is just something we've had to do. It was built into America from the very beginning. We've had to renegotiate our identity in a way that makes that renegotiation kind of fundamental to who we are, in a way that it's not in, Poland. Poland
who are having a perpetual identity crisis.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's something resilient about our Constitution or the propositional nature of our country that allows that or facilitates that or even contradicts that?
Well, so in a way, like it's impossible to get away from having a propositional country, because our imagined community, our fictive kinship with each other from California to Maine, uh, it's something that doesn't have like the deep historical roots of, like a European country that has a feudal history, and that, there was a revolution or national movement against the, that out of which it emerged. Like we just don't have any of that. Like we're here to tell ourselves, like every generation, we have to kind of re-explain to ourselves who we are, why people in Maine and Alabama and California and Kansas are all basically the same people vis-a-vis the Canadians, say,
Yeah.
right? Which is not true if you take it just purely in terms of like shared culture and stuff. You go up to certain parts of like, old Yankeedom, and you go up to certain parts of Canada, and they're much more similar to each other than they are to people
Hmm.
on the other side of the country a lot of the times. And so, those things aren't they aren't always apparent for us in the way that, it's the same thing over in a lot of European countries too. People who live in Paris are more similar to people in Berlin than people who live out in the country than they are to people who live out in the countryside of either city in a lot of ways. But they have this reference point they can look back on. Well, we're the French people. Well, what are the French people? Well, I can explain that to you in very concrete terms, like,
Hmm.
but in America, the terms have never really been that concrete. And so,
Yeah. There's if I recall correctly, it was called Jubilee in Israel, ancient Israel, where every 50 years they forgave all the debts or something like that. There's kind of a
mhm.
year zero. And it's almost like generationally America has a year zero culturally. And that's why we cling so much to boomers and Gen X and millennials, because that's how we kind of hang our hats as having an identity, a collective identity, which is tiered.
Yeah, and I think those generations are really kind of defined by each group's relationship to some real definitive like shifting event, like there's like, how old are you? You're probably about my age, right?
Yeah,
43.
I'm a bit older. Yeah.
Okay, so but we're at that age, right, where like I didn't really use the internet as a part. Like I would go to the computer lab and look something up, but it wasn't like a part of my life in any way until I was probably like 20, 21 years old or
Yeah.
something.
Same.
Young enough that I'm not grandma, trying to figure out the Facebook. Like I get it. I'm totally competent and fluent in the new technology and the new environment that
Yeah.
we have, all totally immersed in it. But I remember a long portion of my life, and even including a portion of my adulthood, bef when none of that existed, before that time. That's just, you're in a different world than somebody who got an iPhone when they were 9 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just it's a totally different experience that's really hard to communicate one generation to the next. And I think the fact that, excuse me, the fact that the world has been changing so fast, really ever since the Industrial Revolution took hold, but culturally it's been changing so fast for like the last century maybe,
Hmm.
that parents have a very hard time maintaining credit. The elder generations have a harder time maintaining credibility with the younger generations, because at the end of the day, the younger generations sense that they don't really understand the world that they're coming up
Hmm.
in the way that like, 1,000 years ago, a father could teach his son what he needs to know about the world, because it's the same thing he needed to know about the world that his father told him, basically, and today that's just not the case. And so the authority of older generations, it sort of becomes this permanent generational revolution that you're talking about,
Hmm.
where kids are, you know every generation of children that we give birth to is like this, it's a horde of barbarians on the horizon. They're forming up to come destroy this place unless we get out there and civilize them before they arrive and get too
Yeah.
much, get too powerful, so that we can't contain them anymore. And that's becoming, I think, in a lot of ways, increasingly more difficult to do,
Yeah.
because the world that the parents would introduce those kids into is just an incredibly different world than the kids are really living in. We're
Hmm.
in a way, we're almost all in the position of, like new immigrants to a country. Like new immigrants show up, and there's always this process, the Joy Luck Club's a great book about it, just this process of like, you have the old country parents who speak the old language, and they're in this new environment. And they almost form a colony in the new country, basically, where they stick to their own and they socialize with their own. And then their kids are born and they grow up in this country and they want to go out and assimilate. They want to be a part of the culture that they're growing up in. They still have enough respect for their parents, though, to feel a certain pull, that keeps them within the fold to a certain degree. And their parents are a little bit worried about them venturing outside the fold and kind of forgetting about the old ways or like the old culture. You get to the third generation, kids who were raised by parents who grew up here, and they're just basically Americans, right? And that's sort of the process that all immigrants have kind of gone through. And the confusion that initial generation experiences watching their kids go out into a world that they don't fully understand, that seems kind of confusing and scary to them, that they feel like they don't have a whole lot to teach them about because, they just got here. And very often the kids understand the new country better than the parents do, that in a way, like generationally, we're all kind of like that now. Because the world is so different. We didn't move maybe geographic locations, but it's so much different for the parents than it is the kids. So that link is sort of snapped apart.
I've been thinking about, there's this guy, this piker named Hassan. He's a very popular streamer. He has something to do with the Young Turks, not the historical Young Turks, but this newer clade of media-savvy individuals. And a clip of him went a little viral, and he said that the left is losing young men. And they're all their domains, gaming and all the different hobbies are steeped in right-wing rhetoric. I don't know what he means by that, but I kind of have a sense that it's not left. I know that much. And you've seen over the past 6 years or so a lot of kind of, op-eds and stuff about usually kind of a female point of view, like worrying about the radicalization of their young men. And I think that there's this underlying story, like we are wrestling, ideologically, we're wrestling for the soul of the next generation. We're trying to, I think, whether consciously or not, people in your position, somebody who's creating content is vying to establish the narrative that will define the virtues and the behaviors ultimately of the next generation. I'm wondering, are you conscious of that? Are you aware of that? Your potential influence on young men?
I suppose, yeah. When you mention it to me, I'm aware of it. I don't really think of myself that way. I think of myself much more as as my function as just the world. We've all been broken apart and isolated in profound ways in very, very recent memory, so that the world's very confusing for people. And there are a lot of ideological predators out there who are looking to like gather up the seed that's scattered on the ground, and I look at myself much more as just somebody not trying to necessarily instill one of those ideologies, and not the Gen X thing of like, just don't accept any ideology, bro, like nothing like that, but to tell people like, there are some basic things you gotta just keep in mind as you go through this, and don't lose your humanity as you do in a time like this. Because when things are this confusing and things are this unpredictable, right, in terms of the future, like I don't think in a way that is would be unfamiliar to anybody, unless you went back to maybe 1968 or 1942. That if you took people today and say, what is the world going to be like in 2035? This should be an easy thing to answer, because you go back to 2015 or 2014 and come to now, it's not that different, really. I mean, it's different, but it's like there's things that have changed. But somebody who's plucked out of 2014 is not going to be a fish out of water in 2024. But I think people look forward to 2035 and they have this sense of like I have no idea, like, because they have this feeling that we're hurtling toward something, hurtling toward a cliff or a wall or some sort of breaking point where the trajectory we're on, just some the tension has to snap at some point,
Yeah.
and people feel like they're close to that, and so it makes the future very blurry to people. And when that's a situation that people are in, especially if they feel isolated, they don't have strong relationships and local connections they feel that they can fall back on in a time of crisis. People get very tribal. Uh, they get very defensive, and I mean, you have to really think about, are we in the show right now?
Yeah,
Oh, okay, cool.
you made it. You just dove right in, so I'm just following.
Um, this is how I talk to my wife and my, everybody. So just it's just how I talk. I mean, if you think about it, like how human beings, right? We're social mammals, like very social mammals, and we evolved from social mammals, and for all of our for millions of years, go back to before we were Homo sapiens, like, and we were just some advanced great ape, whatever. We're these mammals that, when I say we're social, it's not just that we like to hang out with each other. It's that if you're cast out from your group and you feel useless to your group or alienated from them, you have like built-in limbic responses that are telling you like this is a life or death problem for you. This is danger. This is like you're going to die unless you find your way back into a situation like this. So all these, and that manifests as anxiety. It manifests as fear, just all of these things, right? And it's built into us. I mean, that's how we kept our groups together over all those times, right? It's like those things are built into us. And as human beings, those things are still built into us. And we live that way, basically, for all of human history until about like 60 years ago. Literally until about 60 years ago. You go back 100 years, and pretty much everybody lived near their immediate and some of their extended family. If you look at like the European ethnics that had moved to the United States, whether Irish, Italian, Jewish, Polish, whatever, they still lived in urban enclaves and would
Mhm.
know the people that they were raised by, the people they grew up around, would know them their whole lives, and they would know them their whole lives. And so they were socketed into this social situation that uh, it was a cocoon that would allow them to mature into something that could then go out into the world. But they had this home base, right, that they could rest their feet on, and that really formed the boundaries of their identity. Like all of a sudden, like 60 years ago, we just kind of did away with all of that. All those urban enclaves that used to be like ethnic parish communities or whatever, everybody scattered to the suburbs.
Mhm.
People don't know the name of their neighbor anymore. Let
Well, they
alone,
know the name of the politician on their lawn, at least. That's
well,
one way.
that's a good point, because then you start to ask yourself, well, that's actually exactly the point, right? Is that all those things are broken apart and dissolved. All those organic bonds are dissolved, but people are sort of built in a way. It's like in Plato's Symposium, Aristophanes has that like farcical speech about the origin of male and female and human sexuality, right? Where he says in the beginning, humans were actually like two halves, and so you'd have like they were giant creatures, and like you'd have a face and limbs facing that direction and that direction, and they were really powerful, and the gods actually feared them because they were too strong, and so they said, well, we're going to split these people in half, so now you have like male and female and so forth, and put them out there, and all of human history has been basically drawing on the energy of those two halves trying to find their way back to their original unity, right? And so
Hmm.
you take people and you deprive them of the social identities that they had had before, whether, I mean, it's hard for us to understand the degree to which, if you go back 100 years ago, and I'm not talking about 100 years ago in some valley in Montana. I'm talking 100 years ago in New York City, how your average resident of that city, how deeply they felt themselves to be a member of a community. That even if they were a criminal, they still had they were still capable of of shame within the community. Maybe it was bounded there, and that's how they were able
Hmm.
to operate as a criminal. But like they had this environment to which they were subject psychologically in some way, but which also gave them a sense of firmness. So you break all those things apart and send everybody out on their own, tell them to go figure it out. And just like the male and female and in Plato, that everybody immediately just goes and tries to find their way back to something else because we know
Yeah.
that when you're alone, you're in danger. The war and the more unpredictable the future is, the more danger you're in. And so you
Yeah.
better find your way into something that you can clan up with. And that has been, I mean, a lot of our history over the last couple decades. It wasn't maybe quite as much in, say, the 1990s when everything seemed pretty good
Into
and pretty
history, yeah.
predictable and nice. But once, people start getting a scarcity mindset and the future starts looking a little bit blurrier, and then, people start to get a little panicky.
I think that's probably one of the potentials that Elon Musk is drawing on with his, kind of his technological innovation, great works kind of attitude. He's giving specifically, I think, for some reason, young men a potential path. Go in this direction. We're going to go in the stars and stuff. If you look at from where you were writing Fear and Loathing 10 years ago, I'm sure you said that's one of the questions I wanted to ask, if you can remember like when it incubated in you, because it had to have been 2014. If knowing as much as I do about you, you take a really long time to put something out. So you've probably been doing that, but you drop references to Game of Thrones a lot and to The Walking Dead a couple times. And there was this big cultural to-do about a dystopian future. So there was still a sense of future. It was just like everybody's going to be a zombie walking around looking for brains, kind of like this prefiguring the NPC meme, right? So even a negative vision of the future was kind of there. It seems like there's so much less of a vision of the future right now. And I think that can be tapped into very profoundly, and it can go in very problematic directions. And I think that's what underlies the really strong reaction to your appearance on Tucker Carlson, because it shed a light on it's 6 or 7 years since Trump came on the scene. People are really worried about the white males, the white male population, the European stock males in America. And the mainstream has really done a lot to denigrate them and to shove them out. They're very proud. Corporate America is very proud that it hires less and less white men. So they have a sense that they're letting these guys find something of their own. And somebody that's offering narratives, such as you, that kind of start to rejigger those foundation myths, as you call them, is potentially leading men in these directions that are out of control of the mainstream narrative. And that's why I think the word fascist still has so much salience. Do you understand what people mean by that? I was going through your Reddit, the Reddit for Martyrmade, and people, they're calling you like a fascist sympathizer or something like that.
Do you am I allowed to curse on this show?
Yeah.
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 So you say somebody is a fascist, it just means fuck you. That's really all it means in 2024. You know what I mean? Like I don't think there's really a lot more content to it. It's an emotive word that you call somebody on the, who's coded as right wing that you don't like. It really doesn't have anything to do with the historical phenomenon of fascism. I mean, or you could say maybe it's generally like right wing authoritarian or something, but it doesn't even mean that anymore. Like Jonah Goldberg can write a book called Liberal Fascism, and you see right-wing boomer types calling, the Democrats or the real fascists or whatever. It's not a word with a lot of content anymore.
Okay.
I mean, what people probably mean when they say that word about me is just, look, I don't hold any political system, including democracy, as something that was handed down on golden tablets from the Lord our God. Different types of government are more suitable for different people in different conditions, and, like I can look over at China today, and there's a lot of things I hear about the way they govern themselves that I say, wow, I that's not the way I would want to be governed. On the other hand, they have a population 3 times the size of the American population, all packed into an area that's basically the US east of the Mississippi. And I have no idea how you govern that, right? And maybe it's just entirely different. And that's up to them, that's their destiny to work out among themselves. And so I don't look at it as this sort of Whig history idea of just progress, to me, it's an insult to our ancestors in a way, but it's also just it's so profoundly arrogant to think that all of human history was all leading up to this. This is we're finally there. We finally made it, and now we figured it all out, and all of those ignorances and superstitions and whatever, all that's finally overcome, and here we are. We finally figured it out. That's just insane and ridiculous. And you would think that when you go back and look at people in history and realize that we've thought that again and again and again and again and again and always been wrong, that we're probably going to be wrong this time too. I just don't think of it that way. Democracy is it's great in a lot of ways. I think it's silly to think of democracy as it was conceived for the 13 states in the 1780s as anything remotely like a system built for a continent-sized nation of 300 million people, with a politics that's mediated by mass media technology. You're just talking about a totally different situation, right? Than like a New England township, and everybody comes together at the local church to vote on, whether to fill a pothole or something. It's just totally different thing you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so, different. Yeah, I mean. There are times where authoritarian politics. Look, if you were the Polish government in 1936 after Pilsudski died, and you have the Soviet Union over here and National Socialist Germany over here, and you were a democracy. I mean, granted, it couldn't have gone much worse for Poland than it ended up going, but the point is, that democracy was not the system for them. If they were a democracy, they would have become communists. That's what would have happened, because the communists, same thing in Germany, which again, that went a very negative direction. But if they would have remained, a democracy, quote unquote, the Weimar system, the Communist Party was by far the most powerful political party in the country, and it was funded by Moscow, taking direction from Moscow, had resources and organization that nobody else could match. And so maybe you look at that and you say, maybe democracy is not the best thing for us right now. And people think of that as violating some sacred principle, and I just don't.
Yeah.
The point of government, at least since the national revolutions, since we broke out of the feudal mold and now think of ourselves as like the people, and this is our country and so forth.
Yeah.
The point is to make sure that those people feel represented by their government. And if that means that they go and drop a yay or nay in a box somewhere every couple of years, cool. If they feel like that works. I feel like today people don't really feel like that works. People don't really feel like they're represented by the government anymore, regardless of how often they're asked to vote. And so then you have to ask, like, if the point of this is to make the people genuinely feel that they're being represented by their rulers and the institutions that rule them, but that's not happening, then what are we really doing here? And so I just don't hold any of those principles sacred. I look at Russia. It's funny to me how people will say that's not a democracy, it's an authoritarian, just fashion, whatever, all you want to say. And I say, well, yeah, okay, in a lot of ways, they're not like us, but they have a leader that 80% of the population supports. When was the last time we had that? And so how can you say that the people there are less represented by their government than the people here? When our leaders have 30% approval rating if they're superstars, you know what I mean? And so that's, it's just a different way of looking at it. And I just I don't think we should hold those kind of things sacred.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that does bring up the different character, perhaps just saying, if it's true that Russia has 80%, or Putin has 80% approval rating, it might say something about the Russian mindset with regard to authority and America's mindset regard to authority, where no matter what, we're always going to distrust our politicians. No matter what, we're going to voice our dissent. That's just kind of part of how it works for us. But that leaves us on a, this is the problem that I have with the classical liberal, quote unquote, kind of conversation right now with regard to the dissident right. And there's personalities going on in there, but the classical liberals want these systems that are based on truth and based on rationality and based on, education. And we see that those systems have led us to here, and the dissident right are trying to recognize that human beings operate according to power and greed and these things that are irrational. And that scares the classical liberals because they see the left acting that way, and they called that the woke. And now they're trying to call the right the woke because the right has a different, they're, at least the discussions that I'm watching people that you're connected to having, they're just trying to discuss the real politic. And the liberals are like, no, we have to maintain this authority, but they don't really have authority because they don't believe in authority other than this objective truth and these systems that just ideally would function more and more efficiently. What's your stance on kind of that discourse, if you're even interested in it?
I mean, it probably, honestly, it like the Schmittian conversation about friends and enemies and
Yeah.
politics being about power and rewarding friends and punishing. It probably makes me about as uncomfortable as it does the classical liberals. And while like power obviously is one of the operative forces in human society, it's not the one I focus on. Like I focus much more on identity. If you have a social situation where people feel like they're part of a fictive kinship group with the people around them, then they'll work it out. And maybe they'll run a democracy or maybe they'll do something else, but they'll work it out. And they'll live together in a peaceful and prosperous way. When you break those things apart, you start to get conflict, and then it does start to become more just about power, But that's what people really want, is to feel like they're a part of a larger, they're part of something that will carry on after them, something that they can contribute to and serve that is actually worth serving. That's, I think, what people really want. And if they feel like they have that, then the mode of politics and how power is divvied out and so forth, I think is, people will be happy to live under a king if their lives were ordered in that way. And I think the thing that the classical liberals miss is that so many, and I don't want to blame this like just purely on classical liberalism, because the same thing happened under communism. It's a lot of it is just a product of technological change and just the rapid change, the rate of change in the world, but is that it ends up sawing off the branch that it's sitting on, in the sense that in order for classical liberalism to function, I argue with my libertarian friends about this all the time. In order for libertarianism or classical liberalism to function, what you need are people who can govern themselves. And that doesn't mean like, oh, we can rationally figure out what policy to support and we can go vote on it or whatever it is. No, it means you need like people who are in communities that they don't need you. They don't need the government because they've got this basically taken care of, right? If you go back 100 years ago, go to a parish community in New York City where, again, people are growing up in a social environment among people they're going to know their whole lives. We're going to watch them grow up. They're going to watch those people, and it's going to continue on. You have these local institutions like the parish priest, who's not just the guy who preaches on Sundays and leads the liturgy. He's a figure in the community, has real authority in the community.
Yeah.
He has the ability to arbitrate disputes between community members, and when people go to get married, they're going to the parish church, and this priest who's known them since they were preschoolers and has seen them grow up to this point. These two people are now coming together and taking an oath before God, before that priest, and before everybody they know, that this is until death do us part. That means something in a way that it just doesn't anymore, right? So you had all, and what I'm trying to say is you had all these self-regulating local institutions and organic structures that allowed people to social welfare stuff. If a father lost his job, he broke his back, whatever, it wasn't perfect. And that's why we sort of gave all of it up for government bureaucracy over time and everything. But there
Hmm.
were ways to make sure that family was taken care of, you know and the fact that people might need the community for something like that meant that they had to stay in the good graces of the community, and so there's a self-regulation there. So in other words, you take this community and you could do away with the federal government and they literally wouldn't notice. You could do away with the state government and they wouldn't notice, until somebody invaded or whatever. But like really, like on a day-to-day basis, they can govern themselves. You take everybody and just break all those things apart and send them out into the world so everybody's just an isolated individual. Those people can't govern themselves. Those people have no idea what they're going to do if they lose their job or they can't feed themselves all of a sudden. They are totally thrown back on their own resources. And well, the answer to that is we create government institutions, government bureaucracies to fill all the gaps and perform
Hmm.
all the functions that communities used to take care of themselves, right? I mean, like, what is a I always tell this story, and people who listen to my interviews are probably tired of hearing it, but it's just so perfect. I was listening to an interview. Jordan Peterson was interviewing some Canadian child psychologist years ago. This is 3, 4, 5 years ago, something, and he's some big muckety muck like Canadian child psychologist. He works with the Canadian government on developing policies for, at least he was talking about at the time, like interventions for at-risk youth, like in inner cities. And he's going through and describing to Peterson all the different programs that they would do and the thinking behind them and so forth. And he got up to this one point, about halfway or two-thirds of the way through the interview, and he says, "Well, let me give you an example. So let's say you have this single mother in the city, and she's got her first baby, and the baby's crying, the baby's doing all these things, but it's her first baby. She doesn't know what the baby's trying to tell her. She doesn't know how to read these signals and respond to its needs, and so it's very frustrating, and she's having trouble. And so what we'll do is one of our social workers will come in 2, 3 times a week and kind of help her understand what the baby." And so Peterson all of a sudden goes, "So like a grandmother?" And the guy goes, "Well, yeah, I suppose that's one way to look at it." And then I thought about it and I was like, "Oh, wait a second. Like
Yeah.
all of the programs he's
Yeah.
described up to this point have all been bureaucratic replacements for things that we used to do on our own with community and family." And so, if classical liberalism and the sort of the ideologies that naturally attach to it end up being a dissolving acid that breaks apart all of those institutions and organic local ties that allow us to be self-governing, then it's on a longer timeline, but you're calling big government into being, by just through your very denial of
Yeah.
it in a way.
Yeah.
And so
Hmm.
it's yeah, I mean that's really where to me, like that's the big story of the last, ever since say the 1950s. Once you had all of the people in the cities scatter out to the suburbs, break apart those communities that were familiar and that they were socketed into, and all of us and lose touch with, their religious identity to a large degree. I mean, people will still say I'm a Christian, but it used to actually mean something. You were Irish Catholic and you lived in an Irish Catholic neighborhood in a way that it just doesn't anymore, for most people. And so you take all those European ethnics who got scattered out to the suburbs and lost touch with those rooted identities. And those people who used to be Irish Catholics, they're just white guys now. The people who were like Italian Catholics, they're white guys now. The people who were Protestant, method, like everybody is sort of just out there, and they're just, the one thing they have in common with each other is the racial similarity that sort of got exported from the South during the Great Migration. And so
Yeah.
yeah, it's this attempt to like to reconnect and find a tribe that people can feel like they can rely on, in an unpredictable time.
Were you You just described probably both of our stories, just subconsciously growing up in the '90s, the '80s, '90s. When was that, even if you didn't recognize it, starting to shape your behavior and started to shape what you sought when you kind of became a man? And you're like, I need something.
I guess I've always been, so quick factoid about me. I went to about 35, maybe 40 schools between kindergarten and 12th grade. Moved around sometimes every couple months, like all the time, right? And so I was the new kid everywhere I ever went. And a lot of times I was very much fish out of water. A lot of ghetto schools where I was the only white kid, in most of my classes. Had to learn how to operate in environments where I was an outsider and looked at, differently. Uh, and kind of going through life in a way that made me very familiar with loneliness that's maybe too qualitative about it, but like with being by myself, right, and not feeling like I have.
The isn't they people call it deracination? Is that the
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, okay,
rootless?
yeah, that's good, and familiar with that. That I don't think when these ideas started to form up in my head, this was consciously in my mind, but definitely there was a hole I was trying to fill that I'm sure uh, informed those ideas.
Hmm.
I don't know. I think like when I think back to high school, when I would be in a school that I was at for like a fairly reasonable period of time where I could make some friends, and my time in the military, and then just growing up, I've always been the type of person who, and just gets me in trouble with people who are so much more focused on ideas than I tend to be.
Hmm.
Uh, that For me, a friend is somebody who is loyal to me, and that I'm loyal to them. And if this is a person, I've got people like this. I have friends who have ideas in their heads that would peel the paint off your walls in every direction. I've got neo-Nazi friends. I've got black nationalist friends. I've got Israeli Palestinian friends, that if I ever got all these people in the same room, it would be civil war. And a lot of times those people ask me, how can you be friends with this other person? And by now they know me well enough to know that I'm going to give you the same answer that I give him when he asks me that about you, which
Hmm.
is I could call him up at any time, the middle of the night on a random day after not talking to him for 4 months and say, I can't explain. I need you to pack a bag and get on a plane, come help me. And they would be there the next morning. And to me, they can have whatever ideas they want rattling around in their head. That's my
Hmm.
friend, period, end of story. And so everything else, shared interests. And I mean, look, I'm not saying there's not like certain, if I found out that this close friend of mine was a child molester or something, that's going to obviously change. That's not an ideology or like an
Yeah.
idea they have in their head or something. Um, but in general, loyalty's everything. And I think most men, like on some level, we feel that way. Like we really want to be, and this
Hmm.
is something that we've been deprived of tremendously. Like I think, for example, and I think about a lot of concrete examples of people I know who get out of the military, and a lot of what gets diagnosed as PTSD. A lot of it's PTSD, or at least it's an ingredient in it. Don't get me wrong, but what a lot of the pathology that happens when people get out of the military is they're in this environment where they're part of this group of guys that have their back, that they know that they're so close to, that they could like, just very, very close-knit group of people, and being part of a unit with a common goal, and then being plucked out of that, and you move back to your home state where you don't really know anybody, and you have a job, and now you have to go out and make friends or something. And it's hard for people to do that. It's hard for people to make friends randomly. It's always been kind of hard. We just didn't have to do it as often before. Most men who, kind of we kind of understand that, you're in school and you have friends because it's the people you're in school with. You go off and you join the military, and your friends are like people that are in your unit. But then you go off and it's like, okay, now you're in this new city. Go make friends.
Hmm.
And guys that we really like we don't know how to do that very well anymore. You're gonna walk up to a guy and say, "Hi, Benjamin. My name's Darryl Cooper. You look nice. Would you like to hang out sometime?" We just, it's just not how it works.
Yeah.
And I think when people are when you have a whole population of people who are kind of in that state, and who are kind of deprived of that, then you get what we're seeing now. Especially and right now, unfortunately, the online environment has kind of become the replacement for that.
Yeah.
And so you have this like very strange, like, like Jacques Ellul's like theory on steroids, where you have this weird juxtaposition of people being completely isolated and alienated from each other, and yet being part of a mass in a way that is like it makes them almost, just their behaviors are more governable by the mass than ever before. And it's very strange. And so
Yeah. 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 There was one of your most recent interviews, you spoke about the unnatural or supernatural amount of privacy that the internet gives us, and I was thinking about that because I have my phone, my wife has her phone, and we're both interacting with social media, and then I try to tell her a story because somebody's trying to cancel me or that thing. She wants to know all the ins and outs. I'm like, it's too hard to explain,
Yeah.
and it's like it's my mirror and your mirror, and how do you establish trust with somebody when they have so much privacy away from us, and just coming late in life into this current relationship and having so much to catch up on, so many, we were 46 when we met, so we'd had relationships, failures, successes, children in her case, and so we had so much to catch up on in just communicating to each other and understanding each other and then trusting each other. And just the thought of when you talked about that phone and that amount of privacy, and what I'm seeing is that there are bonds that are being facilitated by the internet. Like I have states of affinity, like real strong states of affinity for other people that I meet there. And it's not just that parasocial, like this is a big guy, I've listened to a bunch of his podcasts, but like I actually get to form relationships, and there's a way that I'm plugging in to people. And I've been thinking about how, the lowest level of connection on the internet is just agreement or disagreement. And a lot of the things that you're talking about, that allow us to form these bonds through the internet, are under the guise of ideologies. It's through ideas, but that's not. There's another thing that is possible, and I think when you talk about loyalty, and when you get into the spiritual aspects of your stories, like what I hear you drawing up is that human condition. Like you're taking people from the past, people that you don't know, and then you're assembling these stories of all these data points, and then you're kind of concocting this narrative that you're putting in, and you kind of keep on coming down. And I think maybe that's why you called it Martyrmade. You keep on coming down to this aspect of being able to love even your enemy, like this ability to be connected to your enemy. I think that's what scares people when you present, Hitler as somebody that can be understood or even loved. That really disturbs people. I just spoke a whole bunch of things, but
yeah,
just interacting with your work.
That love your enemy idea, like that's probably one of the best ideas I've come up with. I'm really proud of that one, actually.
Really good. I kind of want to crucify you for coming up with it first.
I mean, look, you want to love your enemy, I think, is the hardest instruction that you're given in any religion. And it's the most revolutionary, and in a lot of ways, like according to all of the natural value systems that emerge among human beings, is the most absurd and ridiculous. It's just so contrary to our understanding of how the world works that that it really takes a religious commitment to embrace it. And it's self-sacrificial. Um, because like, look, how you, in order, like the level of self-surrender and humility that's required for you to be able to do that. It's because it's not going to be something where you say to yourself, where you just transform your soul in such a way that there's an enemy of yours who's wronged you and you just love him because that's the enlightened state at which you've arrived. No, that's a conscious choice. It's something you're commanded to do and it's a command that you accept.
Hmm.
And the level of self-surrender and humility that requires it's it requires surrendering agency on something so basic that that it's obviously hard. It's radical.
Hmm.
And yet at the same time, I think it is, I get very wary of, I see a lot of people who bring up, like the turn the other cheek story or, various things that, that Christ said that, come off as pacifist or, just too open to the other or something. And people will come up with ideas like, well, actually, when he said turn the other cheek, if you translate it this way, what he's really doing is like doing it in a way that like is turning it to the opposite of the plain meaning,
Where I
right?
have
And I
power. Well,
always just,
I'm overstanding you. I'm
yeah, and I
so,
always just look at that as like, you know, if you're reinterpreting something to make it say something that you want it to say anyway, like that's what you actually like. If Christ came and said, yeah, like, you know, uh, establish dominance over your enemy in the following way and humiliate him by doing this, that's fine. Like, we don't need him to tell us to do that. Like, we
hmm.
already want to do that. And so I'm very wary of all those things. And so when you get to something like love your enemy, which is again the hardest of all the sayings, I just think that the harder it is, like the more central it is to like the more important it is in a way, the more significant and central to the whole idea of it is. And
But what's the effect of that? Like if everybody
well,
did that,
if everybody did that, I mean,
or if
so yeah, so
America did
here's the
that.
thing, right? What people take that as is like, well, that means you can't execute a criminal, right? Or you can't go to war or something. But it really doesn't mean that. It just means you execute that criminal as a matter of justice without hatred in your heart, and
Hmm.
understanding that that he's a human being and what the circumstances that led to him being an executable criminal, that's a tragedy too. That this was a tragedy for him as well as for his victims, and to be able to just be open to that. And the thing is like you know when you take on those that an idea like that, you're not doing it for the other person. That criminal is going to be executed regardless. Like it's not about him anymore. It's about you. It's about what kind of an effect it's going to have on your own soul to bear hatred in your heart, or to surrender that hatred and replace it with love or forgiveness.
Hmm.
Forgiveness is not about the other person. Forgiveness is about you. It'll take the weight off of your shoulders. And if it has a positive effect on the other person, that's great. But it's not about that. And I think you have to be able to you have to be able to do that in the hardest possible scenarios, the hardest possible situations. You have to be able to look at somebody like Hitler, who is basically the Lucifer of our secular, order that we have now. He's kind of replaced the devil. You have to be able to look at somebody like that and say that this was a human being in a time and place, and the Germans were human beings in a time and place that turned into something that, again, it doesn't absolve anybody of their crimes to say that they're human beings. It just makes you ask the question of how did human beings turn to this?
Hmm.
You know, um, People talk about like the old question like, would you kill baby Hitler? And I mean, the answer to that is just an obvious no to anybody with any kind of a soul, in my opinion. Just because, even if you know what's going to happen, that baby's innocent, and everybody's born innocent. and you take the human material that they're built with and its interaction with the world over the course of their lives, might turn them into a monster. But
Hmm.
I don't know. I just think, look, when I was growing up, I had like a lot of my friends growing up, the people I would know, a huge number of those people ended up in prison or ended up just on the street or criminals or just being people who, because I grew up in like ghettos and stuff for the most part. And they grew up to be people who you don't look at him and say, oh, he's basically a good guy, but he makes some mistakes and he does some bad things. No, he grew up to be a bad person. Like somebody that you would say, stay away from that person. And if you saw him come around, even if you were friends as kids or whatever, you say, stay away from me, bad people. But I knew those people as kids and they weren't bad, and I knew some of those people as kids who they were just as smart as me. They were just as kind-hearted, as I was. They uh, they didn't like seeing people get bullied, just like I didn't like seeing it. They were courageous, they would stand up to somebody, like, all of these things where I couldn't say that like I have any virtue on this person. Like there's no like virtue I can point to and say, well, the reason I turned out okay and he didn't,
Hmm.
despite our similar backgrounds, is because I had these advantages, in my own makeup and he didn't. It's not that. They're just as good as me as in all of those possible ways. And I know for a fact that uh, if I didn't have a wrestling coach at this critical period in my life where I could have gone this way or that way, and I was an angry kid getting in fights all the time and just a holy terror, but I had a wrestling coach who took an interest in me and provided me some basic guidance, gave me somebody in my life that I didn't want to disappoint enough that I would choose not to go that way. I would stay on the road, at that critical point that if I hadn't had that and the other guy that I'm talking about had that, we could be in opposite, situations. And I've always, I don't, that's not something I believe is a matter of like, this is how I see the world. I know that for a fact, that there were a lot of these kids, and just by looking at myself, knowing that if I would have zigged instead of zagged so many times, there was a time when I was in the Navy early on. I was still kind of a terrorist when I was in the military early. Like I would go out and get in fights. I got like arrested by like Mexican police in Tijuana for punching a cop in the face in Tijuana. And like if they couldn't have been bribed, like with the money we had, I don't know what would happen to me. But that's the kind of like I was pretty out of control. And I mean I grew up in violent environments, and so like it just
Yeah.
it wasn't as foreign to me as it was to like a lot of the people around me, and so I looked like a monster to like the people who were normal. Um, but there was this one time down in San Diego, me and a couple of my friends were at this bar to watch my idiot friend do karaoke. None of us wanted to go, but he dragged us there, so we go, and we're just there, and like I'm basically in my pajamas, like we're there to watch my buddy do karaoke. I'm in like sweatpants and just whatever, and my other two friends are, and my friend gets totally shit faced, and he does his karaoke, and the entire rest of the bar is like dudes in misfit shirts who are like, looking at us like, who are these dudes like in their sweatpants, whatever. And my friend, he's this big gorilla dude who's like going around. He's like late on the list to do his karaoke, so he's not going to get in there till later in the night. And he's afraid that the place is going to get broken up if there are any fights. So anytime he sees two dudes getting each other, he's the one pulls them apart. So by the end of the night, the entire bar, like it's to the point where people are getting on stage to do their karaoke and pointing at us and saying "F these guys," like da 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 da, and we're like, so like end of the night comes and we go outside and like 20 of these guys pile out, and they're mostly a bunch of scrawny kids that like thankfully didn't know how to fight, but they sucker punch my friend. We get into a huge brawl, and the cops show up. Like bouncers from like three different places come. They pull us apart, and the cops show up. One of the kids still knocked out on the ground because I picked him up and dropped him on his head, and like there's blood, people are bleeding, and we're there, right? The cops show up and they just sort of look around and they're like, "Who are you guys? What's going on? You guys, okay? Everybody go home." And so they just send everybody home. And I look at that situation and I say, wow, if that cop had woken up on the wrong side of the bed that day, or if he had just had enough of this shit from people like me who are going out to bars and he has to go break up these fights again, and he says, you know what? Not this time. And he dragged my ass off to jail and charged me with assault. Or if he came and, I had a darker skin pigmentation, any number of variables that would have made that cop go, you know what? No, not this time. Drag me off to jail, charge me with felony assault. I get kicked out of the military with a dishonorable discharge. I can't get a job anywhere now because of that, except for maybe my whole life could
Hmm.
careen off in a totally different direction. You just have no idea what could have led to what. And so I look at things like that and I realize that those of us who became people uh, who are just well socialized and hold the virtues that we consider worth holding, the fact that you're somebody who wouldn't steal from somebody but would try to prevent somebody from getting stolen from, etc. That there's a whole lot of luck involved in that. And I just try to be humble and remember that in every situation, And that doesn't mean, again, you have to be able to execute justice and, operate in the world in a way that's not going to, lead to your immediate martyrdom for
Hmm.
no good reason. Um, but
When
you
did
have
that
to you have to
monster?
bear it. Hmm?
When did that monster leave you?
I was about 24, 25. I was just, and it was again, like I had one of my leaders in the military, somebody who got my respect and um, was able to just show me that uh, a lot of the things I was angry about were things that I was creating myself, and forced me to kind of realize that. And it's no exaggeration to say, I mean, this sounds I had this conversation with him, and it wasn't a conversation. He was chewing my ass in front of people because of like something that had happened. And I went. I'm not very often. You can't tell like from this discussion. Like it's not very frequent that I'm left speechless, right? And
Hmm.
so I was there. Another one of my leaders was there trying to get on my ass. And I was just tearing into him, man, just letting him have it. And I was totally winning the argument, just wiping the floor with him.
Hmm.
And then this guy sees that happening and he comes in, he joins, he listens for a second, and then he jumps in and starts getting on me. And he kicked my ass. I mean, he made it so that I was like, couldn't think of anything to say. And so I went back to my room and I went to bed that night and I woke up the next morning and I was a completely different person. Like
Hmm.
from that moment on. I mean, I just had to, really confront the fact that I was responsible for the way I felt about things and that the world was not something that was being inflicted on me. It's not the world was not something that was, imposing itself on me, that I was responsible for my responses to it. And if I was angry, if I didn't like the situation, it wasn't because things around me were making me angry. It was because, I was choosing to be angry. And it's just really, again, like without being there and explaining the whole, like the whole
Yeah.
context, it's hard to convey the whole thing, but to say it transformed me overnight. And so to give you an idea of what I mean, like in the military, everybody knows about like getting court-martialed, right? That's like if you go to military court. Well, the services also have something called non-judicial punishment, which is where you get punished within your unit, right? You'll go to a trial before like the captain of your ship or the commander of your unit or something, and they'll bring charges against you just like everything else, but it's something short of criminal. It's like, something like disrespecting a superior officer, which is not a
Hmm.
crime. It's just, but it's punishable. And they'll do things like like confine you to your quarters for 45 days, just things like that. I had that happen to me 5 times in about 2 years. in the year 2006, out of 365 days, I was locked on our ship, confined just to our little ship. And this was no aircraft carrier. This was just a little destroyer. There's not much room. I was confined on that ship for about 200 out of 365 days, right? And the year after that, so then this conversation I'm talking about happens. And the year after that, I was the sailor of the year for the entire West Coast Navy, and I had a perfect evaluation, and I was running our department. Like I was in charge of the department. Like it just totally transformed me.
Hmm.
It was 10 years of maturation that should have taken place from like 15 years old to 25 years old that all happened over the course of like a couple days when I was 25.
Yeah.
And it really just had to do with taking responsibility, which is what separates an adult from a child, right?
Hmm.
And a child, when something happens, um, they look around for, who's gonna deal with this. And an adult, when something happens, they say, I better deal with this.
Yeah.
That's really the difference between an adult, like a dependent
Yeah.
mindset and an adult mindset.
Yeah.
And I went through that transformation almost immediately. Um, I think too, the about, I this was maybe so I got out of the Navy in 2011, but then I was a civilian engineer for the Department of Defense after that for 10 years. And my job for the Department of Defense was one that required me to travel mostly overseas, like 8, 9, 10 months a year, mostly by myself. And so I would be overseas by myself, living in hotels, flying around to different bases and so forth, working with foreign militaries most of the year. So that home was like this vacation I would go to sometimes.
Yeah.
And I would get back home and I didn't really know anybody where I was living. I hadn't developed any really relationships or anything there because I was just gone all the time. And I had been doing that for years at this point. And so about maybe 10, 11, 12 years ago, something like that, I sank into like a real depression, which I never experienced before. And I had always been one of those people who kind of looked at people who talk about depression as like, okay, so you're really sad. Like I get it, but you have to deal with it. And this taught me that, what real depression was like is not being really sad. It's like a form of madness, really. Like,
Hmm.
and it's like, and it really pulled me real low for maybe about a year. And I mean, to the point where like there were several times where like it was touch and go whether or not I was going to make it, right? And I didn't really have anybody around to like, it's like my family's in another state, like I didn't have any friends in the area, anything like that. And so I went through that experience, and then I came out of it.
What helped you? Was there a passage or
Yeah, that's a long story, I guess, but
mist
it was
coming off of a mountaintop or
hmm?
just some beautiful sight you saw or
No, no, nothing like that. I think I hit this point where I kind of realized that it was like I really hit home that this was a life or death kind of situation. And once the reality of it set in, I walked away from the cliff. And uh, what came out of that experience was like more than anything else I could say is that I went into it very arrogant in a lot of ways, very prideful, and I
hmm.
came out of it very humbled, you know. Um, and I don't even want to say that in a way that's like humility, like a Christian virtue, like, you know, uh, but where I recognize my own limitations in really strong ways, like where I really understood um, that
You're not the Ubermensch.
yes, dude. Like, because I mean, like I've done like jujitsu and kickboxing and stuff for 20 years, right? It's like my kind of way of, just it's my favorite thing to do. I was a wrestler in high school, and that's what I like to do. And I had this like, if you're a healthy male, you feel this way like no matter what. But when I was like 25, I felt like intellectually, like I know that Mike Tyson could beat me in a fight, or that like the UFC champion could beat me in a fight. Like intellectually, I know that, but if I'm really honest about it, like I don't see how. Like I don't see how it's possible that like these guys could beat me. That's how powerful I felt, right? That's how like I'm just that's not a like knowing that's not true, but that was like how I felt. And going through that experience with depression just like really let me know it's like you're just a dude, and you have to um and and that you have to understand that everybody else out there too, like they're just people also, and everybody's kind of dealing with, everybody's fighting a war that you don't know about as they go through their lives, and you should just be sensitive to it, and
Hmm.
not assume the worst of people, and um, yeah, it was a very humbling experience and one that I'm like profoundly grateful for. It was what I needed at like that particular point in my life. So.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That kind of answered a question that I had about in what ways did you have to be prepared to do your first project, podcast project, Fear and Loathing. It's a huge task, and it requires, of course, discipline and patience, and the willingness to read, and the ability that there's those intellectual abilities, but there's a capacity. I've written novels. Like when you're when it's coming through you, you get stretched. At least that's my experience. You get really stretched apart to put all this stuff together. Are you aware? I don't mean to praise you like it was some superhuman feat that you did, but that was a tremendous piece of work. Like how did you need to be prepared? And I think part of that was definitely your humility comes across in the way that you portray all the different moving parts and all the people. But were there other aspects that you could look back on your life and say, okay, I was ready to do that. I was ready to undertake that task.
Um, I mean, a lot of it had to do with the isolation I was talking about, and it was, when I was a kid moving around all the time, I was a bookworm from a very early age, just because books provided continuity from one environment to another as I was moving around. And
Yeah.
so, when I had a job where I was traveling around the world all the time by myself, mostly, I'd go around with a suitcase full of clothes and a carry-on full of books, and a Kindle. And that's just sort of what I would do anyway. And so that was, if I didn't have that job, if I had another job and I was home and I had friends to hang out with in the evenings after work and stuff, I probably never would have started the podcast. It was definitely like partly just a product of that. Um, I didn't, but the other thing too is, I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I started. Like when I first started it, I thought maybe this will be an episode, maybe two, and like, oh,
Why did you want to talk about it?
because I kept trying to talk to people I know about it. And as much as they love me and like hearing me talk about things I'm interested in, they have their limits.
Yeah.
And so, and so, yeah, one of them actually said, like, why don't you go start a podcast? You're always complaining that there's too much time between Dan Carlin episodes. Go start your own. And I said, I could do that. And
Yeah.
so I, went and did it. And I
Yeah.
picked the easiest, simplest, topic you could imagine for the
This
first
hasn't been
one.
covered before.
Yeah.
Just stick my toe in there.
I get obsessive with my topics, and like, the ones that I get most obsessed with, I think are the one, those are my best work. I got super obsessed with the Israel-Palestine story. I got super obsessed with the Jonestown story.
Yeah.
And I know you listened to the Nietzsche Dostoevsky one. I mean, that's something that's been bouncing around since I was a teenager in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. And there's a lot
Yeah.
of me in that.
No, it really spoke
In
to a
that.
lot of me. Like I was
It
really
was,
like, "Whoa, you're talking about me." You're like, you were reading my own diary to me. That's the power
yeah,
of
I've
those
gotten a
writers.
lot
And
of
then,
emails from people
yeah,
to that effect. And I think, that makes sense, I guess. And, that one, man, I was literally for the last month and a half that I was working on that one, I would plop myself down at my desk in the morning and I would sit there for 12, 14 hours a day just working on it. And it wasn't because I have to get this done by this time. I was just so obsessed with it. And yeah, it's the only episode I ever finished and felt like it wasn't terrible. So,
you felt accomplished. You felt like it was an accomplishment.
I felt like I said what I was trying to say,
Yeah.
that I always come away from things. It's going to be just, like this with the interview here, or anything though, where once it's out in the world, I start thinking about things I left half explained or half said or unclear, and just,
Yeah.
all that stuff starts running through your head. That was the one where I felt like I said what I was trying to say.
What did Jesus say? It is finished, kind of moment.
Yeah, that's basically me. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question? And you can totally deny me this. I was glibly responding to Jay Burden's post. Jay Burden, you were just on his show. He's a great guy. He said, "Quit gooning." That's another right wing thing. This fascist thing to stop pornography consumption. And I kind of retweeted it. Another glib thing like quit porn, start a family, save the republic, in that order. And some couple of guys are like, "Well, how am I supposed to get married? How am I supposed to get married?" And I was like, "Well, it just kind of happened to me." And I was just wondering if you have any personal advice to men, like when you knew you were ready, or when you were ready to be married, if that was another part of another transformative process.
Married in particular, sounds going to be kind of similar to you, where like once, like I hit a point where it was just obvious, like that I'm going to marry this person. It's just not even a decision to make or anything, and things kind of took their natural course. But what I tell people who ask questions like that is, like you have to find an environment where you can develop relationships that allow you to that give you opportunities to deepen them, right? And I think one of the things that's kind of lost on people today is that friendship, any relationship, but even, casual friendships, even that these aren't things that just survive on inertia or momentum. They're like plants that you have to nourish and water, and in order for them to grow and not die, right? Like there'll be times where I have friends who live in different parts of the country, and there'll be nights where I don't feel like talking to anybody on the phone. I've been working out in my garden all day and I'm tired and I hate talking on the phone anyway. And I know that if I call this dude same thing happens every single time. We talk for like an hour and a half, and I really don't have an hour and a half, but I'll do it anyway because you have to feed the relationship. You have to like actually, and sometimes it feels like work. It feels like something you have to do like in order to feed it, and that's okay. The idea that relationships, friendships, or romantic relationships or something are something that should never feel like work. That's just not true. You have to put the work in to like grow these relationships and take the initiative to do it. And so, like the way I started developing a friend group was, like I said, I liked doing jujitsu anyway. I was in a place where I was staying, for quite a while since I was working for the DoD now. I went to the local jujitsu gym, and I just made it a point to, if I walked in and there were people already there, I'd walk around, fist bump, slap five, be like, "What's up, man? What's up? What's up? Nice to see you." If I was the first one in there, people show up, make a point, slap hands, fist bump, whatever. "Nice to see you, brother," and just do that. And then after about like a month or 6 weeks or so, you kind of have enough of a basic rapport with the people that I said, "Hey, I'm getting the UFC fight in my place this weekend. Who's coming?" Ton of people came. And here's the really interesting thing. And I'm still friends with a bunch of these guys that I became friends with through that very deliberate, means. Is that what you find out when you do something like that is that everybody else is in the same boat you're in. Everybody else is sitting there waiting for somebody else to do something like that. And so when you take the initiative and do it, people respond, man. Like everybody's waiting for somebody to step forward and be the one that calls everyone together. you know, and so
Hmm.
you're shy about doing it because you think it's just what if you get rejected or it seems corny or just whatever reason like that you're shy about doing it. Everybody's waiting for you to do it, and they all feel the exact same way you are, and they're thinking about the same thing you're thinking about right now. And so take the initiative to do it like that. And then, I mean, when it comes to getting married, I mean, you have to, you have to build, you have to build a life that you can actually present to a woman as something that
Hmm.
she would want to become a part of. It can't just be like, here's me, look at me. This is my personality, my
Oh, that's
soul.
her
This is
job.
who I
I'm
am,
kidding.
and you should love it because of, we're soulmates or whatever. Is, it's just not. You think about how different sexuality and mating and marriage is today than it really was at any point in the human past, right? Where we have like these situations now where women are told, I mean, back in the day, it was like women became sexually mature, they started their period, and like pretty much like her family was looking for who she's going to marry at that point, and then they figured out, and she goes from her father's house to her husband's house, and then she's in that mode, right? And that's the pipeline. Nowadays, the average millennial or Zoomer, female becomes sexually mature at whatever teenage years, is told by the culture that, if it's not necessarily encouraged, it's absolutely permissible. And her social environment definitely tells her it's encouraged to become sexually active almost immediately or very early on. And then she's not going to get married probably for 20 years, 15, 20 years, till she's 30, 35 years old. So you have this huge stretch of time where a woman is out in the world on her own trying to make a connection just like you are, but for very different reasons. Because similar, some are similar, but I mean, the world presents itself very differently to a woman than it does to a man.
Hmm.
I could go when I was working for the DoD, I could go to a random city in the Middle East or somewhere else, and I would go out at night and I would walk to a restaurant by myself in a city I didn't know just because, the worst could happen for sure. Like somebody could show up with a machine gun or something. But in general, it's like I'm a 200-pound male who can take care of myself. I can go walk in this foreign city at nighttime. Women can't do that in their own neighborhoods, without feeling at least a little tickle of anxiety about it.
Hmm.
And so the world presents itself very differently to women. And when they are looking for partners, like there's that difference you have to account for. Um, but you know the our when you think about the how different it is once you touched on this earlier, you try to build a relationship with somebody who's been through, I mean, you think about like a 35-year-old woman who became sexually active when she was 18 or whatever, was dating maybe in high school or junior high even, um that she's probably had like how she's probably had somebody cheat on her at some point. She's definitely had dudes lie to her, and she found out that she was being lied to or manipulated or used, and she thought this, but it was actually that, and sense of betrayal, going through like a series of relationships that basically by definition all ended in failure and disappointment because otherwise, they wouldn't have ended. And now here she is, and you have to build a relationship with this woman who's been through all that. And I think you really have to be sympathetic and compassionate, to that creature, to somebody who and not condescending, which is like the easy path to those things, but to understand that like, there are a lot of bridges to build that are going to take time and work, and the idea that uh, you're just going to that eruption of emotion at the very beginning is going to be the thing that carries you through your whole life or up to even much past your honeymoon is not the case. It really takes work. You have to accept that and understand that what a lot of like, it really has to do with like building a sense of trust and reliability with somebody. You know, that's what all human relationships are built on. Like a woman can love you just because she watches you take care of her children and be the one that, provides for her and like takes real love can grow out of that. And people don't necessarily think of it that way because we only think in terms of, romantic love,
Attraction. Yeah. Yeah. Not
all of
trust.
our romantic movies like end when they go off to get married, you
Yeah.
know? Like
Yeah.
that's the big ending and the happy ending of the movie. But that's obviously should be the beginning of the movie. And
Hmm.
so, I mean, look, it's hard to give advice to
Yeah.
people out there because people they're in so many different situations that it's hard to speak to all of them. And the world is like, well, put it this way. With the way things are rapidly changing and how confusing the world is for both men and women out there today, I think the important thing is to remember that there are certain things that stay the same and to focus on those, and being reliable and going out and just being a mature adult, being the person, again, who you see us all the time. You see us like from high school on up to like adults, where you see some guy who is not a model, supermodel looking dude by any means, and he's not rich, but the women just flock to him. They all love him. And why is it usually? It's because he's the type of dude, he's the type of dude who, when something happens, he doesn't look around for somebody else to like figure out what to do. He goes and tries to figure it out. And that's it. And if you take that on yourself and actually engage with the world in that way, people will gather around you. They will follow, they want to follow you. They want to come under, you know, under, they feel safer around you. They feel like the world's more stable and more predictable around somebody who's actually an adult because there's not that many adults anymore. There
Hmm.
really are not a lot of
Hmm.
adults. 30,
Yeah.
40, 50 years old doesn't matter. Like most people are still in a very dependent mindset. And so if you have a mindset that engages with the world in an active way, and isn't looking to other people, that should be the primary, like the primary focus. And if you do that, then people will gather to you, you know.
Hmm. Do you think you'll do a comedy? I mean that classically, most of your work is tragic. Do you think you got a love story?
I want to, I have tried to think of podcasts that I could do, um, that I don't know. It's hard. It's
Yeah.
probably, it probably just goes to my mindset that like that's those are the things that interest me. But I don't know. I would like to. I just haven't been able to think of a way to do it yet.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
got any ideas?
Hmm. I don't know. It's hard, being an artist. It's really easy to make something beautiful out of destruction and death and
Yeah,
misery. It's
yeah.
really difficult unless you're just like the light shining through you
Well,
to
and
do a comedy
because
special or something like that. Even that's
the
usually about the dirt.
and also like it's easier to identify stories and to tell them in a way that brings it out, like that where you want to see human beings in extremis, and
Hmm.
see how the different ways that people respond to the extremities of human experience
Hmm.
and wars and various things like that are obvious, like the kind of the most obvious thing that present themselves.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, the novels I read and stuff are not, I don't read war novels or anything for the most part. I like family novels. I like novels just about people,
Hmm. Little
somebody
House
who's
on the
going to,
Prairie or something.
oh no, like I love, John Gardner. He wrote Grendel.
Mm.
It's the
Hmm.
book most people know him for. He's got a bunch of other books that are not fantastical like that or anything. They're just about people, families, like not
Hmm.
exciting really, but he is just, um, he's very, uh, morally sensitive and very empathetic to all of his characters in a way that allows him to portray, a bereaved housewife and, a college dude full of piss and vinegar, like with just a tremendous amount of pathos and sympathy, and do it in a very deep way that makes you feel like that person that you do know that person in real life. You know a version of that person in real life that now I feel like I understand that person a little bit better because I read this character in this book, and he's just incredibly good at that. So I like that kind of stuff. Yeah, and it's the thing I envy. Like I look at like what I do with the podcast. It's like, you know, it's the preschool version of storytelling where. I mean, I'm probably being too hard on myself. Maybe I should say it's like the campfire version of it or something. But when I read somebody like his novels, I read something like Cormac McCarthy's novels or something.
Yeah.
It's where I read that and I'm like, yeah, I just couldn't do that. It's beyond my capabilities to do something like that.
You're in a different medium too. I've been rereading Walter Ong's Orality and Literacy, is it? Yeah, Literacy. And he just talks about the differences between the technology, the word and oral cultures versus literate cultures. And you've brought up on several of the shows that I've heard you talk about technology itself, but I also think that the podcast is a form of communication. It just has different dimensions. It interacts with the brain differently, and the composition's different. I think there's more repetition in it. It's much more reliant on a musicality, kind of. And you do this in Fear and Loathing, where you kind of go over and over the topic, and that's just like it's part of oral culture where they're always repeating things. That's just how, because there's no text to look at, so you have to keep on constantly bringing things back to mind, bringing things back up into mind. And I think there's a different space in that from a literary point of view. So the stories that you tell and the shape of the stories that you tell and the connections that you make with your audience are just, it's a different form. It's a different mode.
I think it overcomes my my natural discomfort with kind of, I'm a man of the people, I guess, right? Where like people ask like, why don't you write a book about Israel Palestine? Fear and Loathing was so good, you should write a book. And the first thing always pops into my head is, who am I to write a book about that topic? But I can make a podcast about it, and I don't feel, because the podcast, I feel like I'm sitting down with my friends and I'm saying, dudes, check out what I read in these books, and like let's talk about it, and let's talk about this stuff. And I feel totally comfortable doing that. But like to write a book, I'm like, there's people that dedicate their whole lives to this, and I don't want my book at the bookstore next to theirs on the shelf. It's like an insult in a way to them. And it's kind of the reason, like when Andrew Roberts and some of these historians wanted to debate me about Winston Churchill and stuff, I was very open about the fact, I'm like, I would get destroyed by Andrew Roberts in a debate. He could pick a topic that he knows nothing about. It could be something from my childhood that he has no idea about and I know intimately, and he would kick my ass in a debate about it. Like, I have no illusions about that, I'm a regular person who likes to talk to people about the books I've read,
Yeah. I think that was one of the disconnects when I saw my friends, internet friends, going after you. And then I listened to you. I'm like, he's not an authoritarian. Like his relationship to authority and to authorship is not what you're putting him out. So people tried to tear you down and fact check and made that the issue, that the facts are the issue and the authority that you're saying. And I saw that you were trying to present a relationship to story that's different than this kind of politicized, fact-based, this is the truth, and then this is how we're going to organize society around that. It's just the way that it was just total, there was such a disconnect. So I'm very appreciative that I got to connect with you and actually interact with your work, and then with you directly, because that's what makes sense to me, not the facts on the ground. And I don't know if Churchill's the architect of World War II. It doesn't really matter to me. I want to know why Israel is just so important to America, and you're helping me grapple with that. But it seems like this is a linchpin for tremendous amounts of instability, or something's going on with the Jewish American culture and then the media environment. And there's a lot of parallels with identity politics, and it's okay in that way, but not okay for this way. So it's really interesting and ripe. And then you being thrust into the middle of that. I'm sure in 2015, you had no idea that it would connect you to all these vested interests.
No, I never expect anybody to listen to the podcast, you know? And I still, and this is a liability a lot of times, but both on social media and in the podcast, I always tend to lose sight of the fact that I'm broadcasting to a large audience. And I always have the mentality that basically it's 1999 and I'm on a members only message board, that is based on mixed martial arts, but we're in the off topic area talking about politics or whatever with guys that I've known for years. Like that's just the mode I default to,
Yeah.
And
how Gen X of you.
Yeah, totally. There's this great quote from David Mamet. I don't remember. It's a whole passage, but he talks about how you have a family, and the people who live in that household, there's so many little things that they already know about each other and that are built into their relationships that don't have to be explained.
Yeah.
That it allows them to operate with a certain naturalness. That even when a close friend comes over after like 3 days, 4 days, like it's starting to get a little old, and it's because all of a sudden you have to become aware of all these things that you didn't have to become aware of before. You can't act quite with the same naturalness because this person's not in on in on it so much.
Yeah.
And so things have to be explained, and you have to be aware of things that before could just rest in the background, and it gets tiring, like being the point man on a military patrol or something. There's a reason they rotate those people out, because having your focused attention like that is it's trying. And so that is that's how I tend to default to the family mode even when I'm in mixed company, on the internet, and that gets me in trouble sometimes. So.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I think it was to Aaron or somebody else about when the whole world peeked into your Twitter, and they see all these Hitler memes or whatever. There's this whole coded language that's subtextual that if you threw that into like popular culture, it's just gonna be like throwing a ball of sulfur into a river. It's just gonna explode, and it's really difficult to be natural, authentic, and have those bonds that have an accretion of context to them and are funny and natural and environmental. And then when the political gets involved in them, and then people are like making friend enemy distinctions, and then you're coded in this way, and then next thing you know, you're fascist. And even if that means fuck you, as you say, it still means you're the untouchable one. So I'm sure you still have that little part of your brain like, I'm going to get outcast. Maybe you don't. Maybe you took care of that.
No, I don't.
No.
What I learned through this whole process, and this has been a valuable thing to learn, because some you can tell yourself, but to learn it in real life is very valuable, is, every single person who was my friend before this is still my friend. My family's still my family, and my neighbors all think I'm a folk hero. And when that's the case, like, honestly, a denunciation from the White House, it's just noise. It's just... Well,
I don't know. It's kind of a badge of honor a little bit. It's not just
that too,
noise.
But even it's just not it's not even I don't want to get like too revealing of our direct message conversations, but we were talking about one of the people who was just coming at me real hard over the whole thing. And I told you this is before we had really talked that much, but I was that I don't have any negative feelings toward that person. Like, they're doing what they do for their content creation channel, whatever it is, and that's fine. Like, and they have built-in emotional reactions to certain things that I triggered, and I understand that. I was, planting those landmines when I got into that conversation. I don't hold that against anybody, and it's fine. Like, I don't take any of that stuff personally, and not everybody gets an opportunity to subject all of their friends to a loyalty test all at once and have all of them pass with flying colors. And, you don't want to subject your friends to that. Some of them have a lot of pressure, and I felt bad about that. But but they're deeper friendships now. So
that says something about the friends, but it also says something about what you said earlier about what your friendship is based on. Like, what is it based on? Is it based on we agree with each other? Is it based on we do the same thing together? Is there this other sense of loyalty? Is there this other sense of connection.
Yeah, and I think like the people who would point out some of the memes and stuff, like I do have the excuse that you provided for me just now, which is, that there's layers of context, and really I'm talking to a small group of people, and now everybody's looking in on the conversation, who don't understand that all that's true and everything. But at the same time, like I am in, and I have a few friends who were very offended by all of that, that I took their feelings about it very seriously, because I know they're
Yeah.
coming from a genuine place,
Yeah.
where you know you can have like you think of like a stand-up comedian, right? He can go on stage and he can talk about murdering a bunch of children. If it's a funny joke, it's a funny joke. Like it doesn't matter. Like he can get
Is
away
this
with
a
it if it
reference
makes
to
everybody.
Sam Harris
Hmm?
and the babies in the Biden's basement thing? No. Sorry. Bad joke.
Oh,
Just
yeah,
being
yeah.
a
Well, okay.
poor comedian.
But you can do that. But then if you tell that joke in a room and somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, my child was murdered," like,
Yeah.
it's hard to hear, then you're kind of a bad person if you don't feel bad about that. And it doesn't
Yeah.
mean you have to completely change the way you act all the time about something, but you do have to be sensitive to those things. And so when, I use a Hitler image to make like an extreme point, I accept the fact that, look, Hitler means different things to different people. World War II is a symbol to us more than it's just a historical event, right? If you go to a Chinese person or a Japanese person, World War
Yeah.
II means something totally different than it does to somebody in the West or a Jewish person, right? And it's just totally different. Like they might get to the Holocaust as like on page 300 of their book about World War II, and not on page one. But if you do, if you're in a room and you have to account for what the symbols mean to other people, you know? And
Mm.
so, like if you were, like one of the memes that people got so upset about was the one where, there was
The
the
Olympic.
mocking of the Last Supper, the Last Supper desecration in the Paris Olympics. And, it was, I mean, you want to call me a fascist? I guess it's fine. If I was the ruler of France, I'd have had all those people rounded up and thrown in jail. Like that's how I feel about that, right?
Hmm.
But that's why I'm not in charge. That's fine. Um, but like I have very, very strong feelings about that. In other
Yeah.
words, like it
Yeah.
really triggered me, right? That symbol is sacred to me, and it triggered me the same
Yeah.
way that me responding with a Hitler meme triggered some other people. And so I can't say that you shouldn't get so sensitive about that, or you should understand the context, because
Yeah.
I wasn't listening to any of that when I saw that Last Supper thing. And you do have to be kind of empathetic about that, because, at the end of
Yeah.
the day, we all have to live together.
Yeah. What is the future for you? I know you're working on this tiny little story. You picked another little topic called World War. It was the second one that you're going after.
Yeah,
Is
part
that
two. Yeah.
does that include your whole future? Is that like your
So
future right now?
I had a couple episodes already in the pipeline that I was going to do, because I was in the middle of a series about the American labor movement. And I had a
Hmm.
couple episodes that were, 50 to 60% done for that. I had another one-off I was going to do, and then I was going to get to World War II. And so for the last few years, what I'll do is I'll be obsessively working on one topic, but then like in the mornings and evenings for an hour or two, I'll be doing background reading on a topic that's further
Yeah.
down the line, right? So I've been doing
Yeah.
that for World War II for a while, and of course I've been reading about the war for many, many years, but really kind of focused reading for a
Hmm.
while. And this whole situation kind of accelerated my plans, and so
Yeah.
yeah, I'll be doing a series on World War II from the perspective of the Germans specifically.
Hmm.
And it's going to be obviously like a very hard, I'm going to be walking a tightrope, in a lot of ways, like where there are a lot of ways to mess it up, and there are a lot of ways to get it wrong. And there's really only one way to get it right.
Hmm.
And, but the
Hmm.
the real goal again is just going to be to uh, to humanize the people involved. Which is again when I do that with the Jonestown cult or the perpetrators of the My Lai massacre or the Zionists or the Palestinians. Everybody thinks that's a noble way to approach storytelling. In this one, there's a lot of people who don't, but I want to be able to tell the story to those people as well as people who are coming at it from a more neutral or from even an opposite perspective, you know? Um, because at the end of the day, man, like, look, the end of the day, like World War II happened to the Germans too.
Hmm.
And it, it was an experience that none of us can really
They lost
do.
Germany. They lost Germany, one could argue.
Yeah, they lost Germany. I mean, and they went through, they like to go through an experience like that, and then to have, spend the ensuing generations, really thinking of your, like, there's a cutoff in their sense of history because there's this point where, their ancestors are almost like in their own country, it's basically the law that you will think of those people as demons, your own ancestors. And so that just creates a rift in your history that, yeah, it breaks down your identity in profound ways. And so,
Hmm.
um, yeah, I mean, it's not going to be, the last thing that I will ever be trying to do is justify the actions of the Germans in that war.
Yeah.
The Germans, they look, I mean, they behaved like barbarians on the Eastern Front, and they fought that war in a pre-modern, primitive way that
But with modern technology.
with modern technology that can't be excused. They and that you can't diminish that. You cannot diminish that, but you have to also look at it and say, well, you know, um, Osama bin Laden was a innocent 3-year-old at one time, and he
Yeah.
became a terrorist. And the story of how that 3-year-old became a terrorist is really like that's the human story that's most interesting.
Yeah.
And so,
You, some of your topics, and I'll let you go soon, kind of last wrapping up, but you can deal with some pretty freaking dire stuff, right? Some radioactive material, the Epstein stuff, your anti-humans, which you warned me not to watch, so I haven't listened to it yet. But how do you clean yourself, or after handling that material, or is there the way that you handle the material that keeps it from sticking to you? But like even just that passage in the was it the Underground, the Dostoevsky Nietzsche, where with that horse, you go into this passage from Dostoevsky, and maybe it's one thing to read that in a book, but it's another thing to listen to you tell me that story, and it was just wringing my heart so much. It just felt terrible. It just felt so terrible. So I'm wondering, how do you when you're dealing with history, not just stories, but you're dealing with, Unit 731 or whatever is the extreme of human depravity. How do you guard yourself, or in the ensuing hours, days, allow yourself to be cleansed of it?
oh, I'm not very good at it. I
Hmm.
I guess I'm a religious person, and at the very like base of everything else I believe, I think that God's power is to take chaos and evil and transform it into order and good. And I think that all of the I believe, I guess, it's my maybe a decision to believe that in the end everything works out for the best, and that all of the things that are apparently chaotic and evil and destructive to us, that it all has a reason that'll be explained in the end. And I guess I just lean on that. But in terms of how I don't guard myself psychologically at all from this stuff, like it's a problem. Put it that way,
Hmm.
Like I get into this stuff and I get so obsessed with it. Like when I was doing the Jonestown series, there's like 1,000 hours of recordings that they left behind of like his
Yeah.
sermons and their meetings and all this. I listened to that for 3, 4 months, just all day in my headphones. I was mostly overseas working while I was doing it. I was just listening nonstop. And I was literally hearing this guy and seeing this guy in my dreams.
Hmm.
And it it got me to a place where I felt like one of his followers. And I don't just mean like I felt like I'm in the room listening to this guy. It was, I could understand why somebody would follow this guy. And I felt like somebody who would follow this guy. And to be able to put yourself in that scenario without having it affect you in some ways is maybe not possible to do. And so maybe my way of doing it is once I'm done with a topic, like I'm done with it.
You
I
just forget
don't,
about
yeah, a lot of times people like after the Gaza thing started up,
it. Hmm.
everybody wanted me to come on their podcast and talk about Israel Palestine. And
Yeah.
I would always refer them to other people because I'd be like, look, man, like obviously like you can listen to the podcast. Like I know the material on some level, I've got all the books here but that is pushed out of my head. Like that was
Hmm.
7, 8 years ago. I finished that series and I've really not thought deeply about it, like really since. And I've moved on. And I kind of do that with every topic. Like once something I'm done with something, I'm done with it.
Darryl Cooper, Martyrmade. You have another podcast. You still with this Jocko guy? You still do that?
Yep, this Jocko
That's-
guy, yeah.
Yeah.
It's called The Unraveling with
Yeah.
Jocko.
And your Substack's available. I'll link it all in the description. Anything else you
Nope.
plug? You have mugs, hats,
I think
political
there's some merch on the
candidate you
website
want
somewhere.
to plug?
No, it's all right.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much for your time. You're a super busy
Thanks,
guy. I
man.
really appreciate it.
Appreciate it too.
I ended the recording.